Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
We're in a bit of a different space today, aren't we?
We are. We've come into a studio today just to try out a few things differently.
Yes. So for those of you, if you do not have the video on, we're in a very dark room with some mood lighting.
We are. Yeah, we're trying something a bit different. And it actually really suits the topic that we're talking about today.
You think? Yes.
I think I do, yes.
Okay, so tell us, what is the topic for this fortnight?
Well, this time we're not talking specifically about children. We're actually targeting adults, and we're going to be chatting through, some conversational tips and how to be confident in your conversations with people.
Yeah, great. Well, we are two adults having a conversation, aren't we?
Yes. So this kind of mood lighting reminds me of sort of sitting inside a dark, dimly lit restaurant or a club or something, and you're perhaps meeting someone for the first time, or you're having that conversation to really try and get to know someone. But of course, with coming into celebratory season, with Christmas coming up, there's a lot more parties and events and family gatherings and work gatherings that we need to get to. So, I thought it'd be great just to talk about how do we have great conversations with people.
Yeah, great. Well, let's get into it, shall we? So your background is in speech pathology, where obviously you're talking all about conversation and speech and language and all that good stuff. So when it comes to approaching this topic of helping adults have conversation, first of all, do you have many people who come in wanting help with conversation?
Yeah, we do from time to time. I did spend a chunk of my time for a few years actually really coaching people very specifically in public speaking and in conversational skills and making connections with others. So that was utilising my speech pathology knowledge with a lot of other practical experience as well. Yeah, so that was a fun part of my career.
Yeah. Well, that's actually interesting to know, because I think some people wouldn't know how much help there is out there for adults. Like, I think a lot of people think that speech therapy sort of starts and finishes with young kids. But
yeah, absolutely.
It's ongoing throughout life, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about why conversation skills are important for adults? Just a general overview of, I think we can maybe think in our heads of what's important, but can you give us a general overview of why conversation skills are so important?
Yeah. Well, we've all had that experience where we've had a good conversation, where we've come away and gone, oh, that was incredible. I really enjoyed talking to that person, where we feel like we got to know them a bit, we've learnt a bit about them, they've understood us, we've had that great connection. And once you've had that, you really want to have more of it. But it's not something that necessarily comes naturally or easily in every conversation. So I think having a little toolkit of things that you can fall back on and rely on just to help you feel confident having conversations is really, really important. Yeah,
definitely. So what are some things to have in that toolkit then?
Yeah, well, there's lots. So maybe if we pick a particular scenario and then we think about what sort of tools we might use in that kind of environment. There's some general principles that cover every conversation, but meeting someone at a cocktail party versus chatting to someone at a family barbecue is sort of two very different kind of scenarios.
Yeah. Well, let's start there then. So you're meeting someone at a cocktail party or house party, whatever it may be. So you're walking into a room full of people.
Yeah.
What would be your tips for approaching that scenario?
Yeah, I guess first of all, you've got to feel confident actually approaching someone to have the conversation or knowing where to stand. So we know that feeling of walking into a new environment and going, I don't know anyone here. I don't know where to stand. I don't know where to sit. I don't know what to do with myself. If you go in armed with some conversational strategies, that'll help you feel more confident moving in to talk to various people. But I guess if you're feeling particularly nervous, the first thing I would suggest is find that other person that's also looking a little bit nervous. It's often the person hanging around the drinks table or hanging back a little bit. They're often feeling a little bit overwhelmed as well. So actually deliberately approaching that person to start a conversation can be a good place, because they're going to be more receptive to chatting to you. It's very hard to break into a group that's already talking, but making a connection with someone who also needs a connection is really helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So that's a good tip, I think, approaching the one who maybe also looks nervous, because you're sort of helping each other out, aren't you? They're maybe not sure how to approach, you're not sure who to approach, but you start a conversation together, and that could be a great connection there.
And look, the best way to start is just by introducing yourself, just introducing your name and just finding out their name. Look, our names are so important. They're the one thing that about us that's really personal. And so if you can remember somebody's name, that is just so powerful. They will remember that they've had that connection with you. So, I mean, you might have heard a few tips before about when you hear someone's name, just repeat it back to them several times naturally in conversation, and that will help cement it in your own mind, and you'll be able to recall it more easily. Another strategy that you might have heard about is, I guess, kind of like having a hook on the name. So thinking about the name and then thinking about a characteristic about the person, and then, putting the hook on that. So, for example, if I were meeting you for the first time and I found out your name was Hosanna, I might in my head go, oh, happy Hosanna, because you're always smiling. So
there you go. So assigning it as something else, some other characteristic.
yeah, just to help you remember it is really good. And as I said, using that name several times in the conversation just to reinforce it in your mind. Really, really helpful. Yeah. So that's probably the first tip. Introduce yourself with confidence and, get to know the other person.
Yeah. And if you're remembering someone's name, I think that makes you more confident in the conversation. I know I find that, like, if I'm partway through a conversation, I'm like, oh, I've already forgotten their name. Or if I'm see them out the next time, I'm more hesitant to approach them if I don't remember their name, because I would feel a bit awkward about doing that.
Yeah.
So that's a good tip to, I guess, prioritize remembering the name. It's okay if you do forget. You can always clarify.
A little helpful strategy is actually to ask them how they spell their name.
Yeah. How do you spell that again? It's Ben, B-E-N.
Yeah. It doesn't always work for you, but it can be quite helpful. So
yeah. Okay. Yeah, there you go.
So once you've you know their name, I guess the next thing to want to find out is ask them a question. Yeah. So the sooner that you can get the other person talking about themselves, the more relaxed they feel and the more connected they're going to feel to you.
Yeah, so getting them talking about themselves.
Yeah, so if you're at the cocktail party, you might ask them what's their connection with the host, or how they've ended up at this event. Just something that gets them really, relaxed. But the key is always to ask open-ended questions.
Okay. Yeah. So what does that mean, open-ended questions?
So they're the questions that demand at least a few words or a sentence as an answer. So you wouldn't say something like, do you know Hosanna? Because that'll be yes or no. The question might be, how do you know Hosanna? And that would then lead them into talking about maybe where they'd met you before, or what role you've played in their life. So keeping them open, so asking them how questions and, anything that's going to encourage more conversation.
Yeah, I like that, open-ended questions. And so if you've got a little bit of brain freeze around those questions, what are some good starter questions, do you think, that just gets that going?
Yeah, I think you want to sort of establish fairly early what their connection is to the event or the function that you're at, what role they've got, how they know various people, just things that are not too personal, but they're also going to help you get to know that person a little bit more.
Okay, so sort of focusing on things you might have in common, or finding that sort of mutual ground. That's a good starting point, actually. Like, how do you know the host? Because you're both there at the party in that scenario. Yeah.
There is a thing called a conversational stack that can help you go through various levels of questions and different conversational topics. But I think we might save that whole one for another episode, because that's really quite in detail. And that today we'll just focus on touching on some basic principles about it. But I have to point out, you've actually been using one of the tips really well today, and that is, if you are wanting to keep the conversation going, actually just repeat back the last thing that the person said.
It also works as a bit of a stall to prepare your next question, or to even just reflect and let it sink in properly.
Exactly. So that little bit of reflection and reflecting back to the other person is really important, because it establishes a deeper connection, because they really know that you've heard them and that you've understood them. So it's like that check-in clarification question for them, and they're like, yes, she understands what I'm saying. Yes, she's got it. But for you as the person asking the questions, it gives you that little bit of time to consider what you want to say next. And a lot of times it just helps them add an additional comment.
I've got a notification somewhere.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
We've talked about having really open-ended questions, approaching people confidently. I guess the other element of approaching people confidently is really understanding body language. That's really, really important. It's just a very, very small percentage. It's less than 10% of the words that we say are part of our message that we're communicating.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a really
That
tiny
little.
percentage. Yeah, what makes up the rest is another small percentage that has to do with our tone of voice, the way that we're using our volume and our pitch, and whether it's going up and down and all those sorts of things that helps convey a message. But by far the majority of our message comes through with our body language. So understanding a bit about body language can help you know who to approach at a party, when to approach a group, and also to help you make that deeper connection with someone and show that you're really listening to them. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the body language and the tone of voice that are both small. Wait.
The
have I got it
word?
the wrong way.
It's the words.
Words that are small.
Tone of voice is fairly small too. But
Yes.
a big chunk is body language.
Body language.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what are some things that we can do to make sure our body language is good? What does that look like?
Yeah. So if you are wanting to know, perhaps as we said before, who would the person that you might approach in the room, someone who's perhaps not feeling so confident. We all know that if you're feeling a little bit nervous, you might kind of fold in on yourself a little bit.
Okay.
So the body language is not as open.
Maybe a little bit hunched.
Yeah, like a closed body position.
Like crossed arms or that sort of thing.
That sort of thing. So what you're really wanting to do to put that person at ease is to make sure that you open up your body language, that you stay nice and relaxed. You might have to mentally do a bit of a check-in and go, big breath, yep, I'm open and I'm relaxed.
Body,
yeah.
shoulders,
your
loose,
posture,
back.
facing them with your whole body is kind of important. There's a little tip that says where someone's feet are pointing, that's actually where their interest lies.
Oh, interesting.
So if you want to show that you're engaged and you're ready to listen and you want to connect with a person, make sure you're standing there with your whole body, that your feet are actually pointing in. You can all tell people maybe who are in a group setting who have one foot pointing into the group and one foot pointing out and they're leaning back. They're potentially looking for an exit from the conversation.
Do you think that's true, that foot thing?
Oh, look, none of this is 100%. None of it's 100%. But you do know yourself, if you're wanting to make a move on something, you'll start to edge backwards a little bit.
That's true.
And you poise your foot facing out, ready to say, thanks very much, and take off.
Yes. You can tell, I think, when someone, is ready to leave, they're sort of making that lean back.
Exactly. So none of this is an exact science in terms of, I've seen that, therefore this must equal that. I mean, there's always exceptions to how people are feeling.
They might just have a funky gait where they have one foot that sticks
they
out.
They might, and same with the cross-body folding your arms. They could actually just be cold. But you can tend to read that a little bit more if you're looking at their face. So, but in general, if you want to make a connection with someone so that they feel relaxed, that they're more likely to engage in conversation with you, face them with your whole body and stay open.
Okay. Yeah.
If you're sitting down, leaning forward a little bit can be really helpful because that, again, shows that you're really interested in them. But you've got to, of course, be mindful of people's, social spacing and all of that kind of thing as well.
Yeah. So if you're someone that's wanting to get better at conversation skills, like maybe that you're a little bit socially awkward or that you just like to master it a little bit better, do you have advice for where you can go to seek out conversations or how you can go about trying to get that practice?
Oh, well, that's a key point now, like practice. When we're always going to make social gaffes at some point. We're always going to, something we say is not going to hit the note. We'll say something that didn't come out quite as we meant it to, and that's okay. Just remember to keep practicing. Don't let those things hold you back. So we talked about the questions. I guess if you're going into a particular setting or there's a particular type of person that you want to be talking to, actually just preparing some questions beforehand can be really helpful, just so that you feel like you've got a few, particularly if you're going to a group on a particular topic, make sure you've got some good questions
like a book club or something like that.
That's right, yeah. I think another thing to think about is actually be confident with your vocabulary. So learn new words. Make sure that you're always hearing new things, learning from other people, learning what new words mean. I know in my job, sometimes it's hard to keep up with the new words that particularly the kids are saying.
The young ones.
Oh,
the
those
Gen
young
Z.
ones. Yeah. Often the way, words change meaning really, really quickly.
Yes.
And so, yeah, so listening a lot to what other people are saying will just really help you feel confident in the language that you're using as well. Yeah. So, we talked a bit about listening, didn't we? About how we're going to listen with our whole bodies.
Yes.
Reflecting back to people.
Reflecting back, and then you can follow up with a question
Yeah.
after that, sort of showing that you've heard, maybe repeating back something they've
Yeah.
said, and then you can follow up with a question.
Yeah. I think another thing too is to be ready to share some personal stories, show a bit of vulnerability.
That's good. It's not an interview. You're not just like targeting them question after question after question.
Absolutely. And
Not interrogating.
Yeah, and on that is just be comfortable with the pauses, because pauses will just allow everyone a chance to sort of process the information that's going on. Don't be scared of pauses. They're natural and, they're actually really, really helpful for a lot of people.
Pauses make me nervous, I think. I tend, especially if I don't know a person well, I tend to just get a little bit of verbal, I don't want to say verbal diarrhea because that sounds really gross, but just a little bit of like, I want to fill the gap. I want to, I guess, jump in, and I'm just hesitant of leaving it open because I don't know. I guess there's a balance there, isn't it? Like there's a short pause, then there's a long pause, and you have in your head, is this a good length pause?
Yeah. I mean, just think about the people that you're most comfortable with. Those people that you're going to sit down in the lounge and have a coffee with and have a chat to. You're not scared of pauses then.
No.
Pauses come quite naturally in the conversation, and it's okay. When we're meeting someone for the first time, those pauses are probably not quite as long, but it's just important to have them because that's natural. There's nothing worse than having a conversation with someone, like you say, they're just firing questions at you. And that's where the active listening really comes in, because if you are asking a question and then you're already trying to think of what your next question is, you haven't given them that full listening attention. So that's where repeating back the last thing that they said is helpful, because it helps you buy a bit of time to gather your thoughts to think of what you might say next. But just even making comments like, oh, tell me about that, or, oh, that's really interesting. Tell me a bit more, or can help people expand on their topic that they've just been talking about.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So we've talked about listening, and we've talked about the leaving gaps. Not too long, obviously, but leaving some gaps in there, not making it like an interrogation.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess we just very quickly said share stories about your personal experience, but there is a skill and an art to that. Again, we've probably been in conversations where people are just eager to tell you everything they know about a topic. They're eager just to fill in as much information as they can. So they're often wanting to share details about what they know. That can be a bit challenging to listen to all the time. So be careful that you're not one of those people just giving information. And we also have had conversations with people where all they do is talk about themselves, which again is not great. But we do want to be able to tell a story in a really concise and clear manner that's going to help the connection remain.
Yes.
And it's going to add to that experience and not detract from it. And that's actually something we do work a lot on in the clinic. We do this with right through from kids through to adults. We actually practice how you tell a good story. How can you relate something that you've experienced and put it together in a really concise manner that's engaging for the other person and is going to keep the conversation flowing.
Yeah. So it's almost like that yes and sort of mentality that they talk about in what's it called? Improv, like improv classes. You sort of take someone's suggestion and you're like, yes, and you add to it. So you're not just repeating and you're not just sort of sharing something that's not really going to add anything, but you try and bring a story that is maybe related, but also, forges that deeper connection.
Yeah. I guess if I had to give a quick tip on storytelling, to avoid these long-winded anecdotes that you feel like is just kind of going around in circles, it's great if in your mind you can jump straight to a single moment in time. And then you take your listener right to that moment in time and they're right there with you. So that's, in classic storytelling terms, we'd say we need the setting and we need the character. So we need to know where you were, who you were with, when it happened, and what's going on. So it's like that opening scene in a movie. So before anyone's ever necessarily said anything in the movie, you gain so much information. You can see where they are, you can see who they're with, you can see what the weather's like, you can see the environment. You've got a visual image of that scene. Well, we can do that verbally and very, very quickly too. You know, it could be this morning I was at the dog groomers with my dog and I was chatting to the girl who'd just clipped the coat. So immediately, you don't know what my story is going to be about. I could talk about anything from that point, but you are with me or visually and mentally in your mind there. You know who's there, you know where I am, and you know what's going on.
And that was quite concise too. It was just sort of a one sentence setup of this is where I was, who I was talking to. Takes you straight there. Not just like, early this morning, I think it was around like 10:30, 11. I had to take my car and drive to the dog groomers and I had to do this.
You lost me. I don't care what you were doing there now.
Yeah,
you want to just jump in straight away, and then from that gives you like a shared point to then launch your story. And you get to your point really quickly. Say, what happened?
And that's quite a skill, isn't it? I think it does require that sort of thinking through the story already in your head and finding the best spot to start. Whereas if you're not someone who can think on your feet like that, you might just be like, I have a story to share. I'm just going to start and let my brain catch up. And I guess that can be harder for some people than others.
Yeah, but that's what practicing is really helpful. And this is where we can do a lot of coaching in speech pathology to help really develop those skills and help you develop them quickly. Another time you can actually use that technique is if you want to share a bit of information that you've read. So we talked about how you don't want to just blurt out information all the time, but you could actually say, hey, yesterday I was sitting having a coffee at the kitchen table and I was reading in the newspaper and you wouldn't believe I read, and you can share your information. So you're taking them again to that moment in time so they're with you, and then you can launch the rest of your story and do that quite concisely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Sorry, I have to burp. Perhaps wait for no podcast.
Yeah. So.
That's really, I like that. So the practicing telling stories and practicing keeping it concise and painting that snapshot, taking them straight to the moment, to the source of the information.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. So, I mean, a lot of these techniques we've talked about you can use in any setting. Obviously, if you're going into a familiar setting or you're going to chat to people that you know a little bit, but not necessarily a whole lot, there's different types of questions you can ask that will help get to know them a little bit more. But I guess the aim of a conversation is not always that they tell you a lot more or that you know them in a new and different way, although that's a bonus. I think the aim of many conversations is really to form that connection. Because if you have a connection with somebody, then you're more likely to go back and talk to them again. And that's what we want. I mean, that's how we build friendships and relationships. We all know that person that we love talking to because we feel like they've listened to us and they've understood us, and that's what you want. So even if you didn't get all of your information out, you didn't tell every story you wanted to tell, that's probably a good thing. If you were listening to what they were saying, then they're going to come back and seek you out and chat to you some more.
Yeah, that's good. You want to make them feel positive. I did hear that people sort of remember less so what you talked about, but more so how that conversation made them feel in themselves. Was it relaxing and at ease? Did they feel awkward, or did they feel like you weren't listening to them? So that's a good point, is to make sure that they're having a good experience, and yourself too. But
that's right. And if you finish the conversation and you use their name when you're wrapping it up, man, they're going to come back. They want more. Absolutely, because it's a hook because they felt relaxed and comfortable, and you remembered who they are personally. Yeah, they'll be back.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. You've got a lot of great advice on conversations. It's almost like you're a professional.
It's almost like I've had a few in my life, yes.
Yeah. So out of all these bits of information, do you have one that you think wraps it up nicely, like in terms of you could only give someone like one piece of advice? Or I guess there's a lot to it, so maybe that's a little bit hard to just pinpoint it. But if someone's really struggling with this and they feel really awkward and they're not sure if it will ever get better, what do you think would be an encouraging piece of advice?
Okay. My one piece of advice is keep practicing.
Mm-hmm.
Because conversations are a skill like anything else. Some people, they can do it naturally and it takes little effort, and some people are going to take a lot more effort to learn the skill. So everything good comes with practice.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've had one bad conversation, don't say, that's it, I'm not talking to that person ever again. Or, don't feel like you've got to run home and hide because something didn't come out right.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. Everybody has these gaffes. Everybody says something that they shouldn't have at some point.
Faux pas.
Those faux pas. But you know what? If you can actually laugh about it, just, admit if you've said the wrong thing.
Yes.
Or, sometimes there are those conversations you go, yeah, you know what? I'm never going to see that person again, so that's okay.
Yeah.
But you won't make the same mistake again. So, yeah, just practice. Don't give up. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. I had a conversation like that recently, just on the weekend, where I was seeing someone that I hadn't seen in a while, and I feel like I was trying to keep the conversation going, and I wasn't sure if they were wanting to keep talking or if they were just really shy. Sometimes you can't gauge that very well, whether they really want to talk but they're just not sure what questions to ask. And so there were some of those longer gaps where I just felt the need to fill it. And then after a little bit, I was like, okay, well, I don't feel like this conversation is a great success, so now I need to find a little exit strategy. So I sort of made a comment about something, said, lovely talking to you, and just sort of excused myself. But then I did find myself thinking that through in my head a little bit. It was like, oh, was that really awkward? Did they even want to talk to me? I'm not sure. And so I do think sometimes you can beat yourself up a little bit about that. It depends on your personality and what you're like. But if you're someone who thinks about those things a lot, probably is a good reminder that everyone has awkward conversations.
Absolutely. And do you know what? I can guarantee you that person is not thinking about you anymore.
I know.
You've wasted so much energy thinking about how they perceived you. And do you know what? They've moved on.
Yes. Yeah. And the more that you're putting yourself out there and talking to people, the more you sort of will fail in a way. Like the more conversations you have, just statistically, the more bad conversations you're going to have.
Yeah.
And the more good conversations. So both. And that exposure therapy in a way of going out there, trying, failing is like, oh, well, this happened last week and it was fine. And this is happening now and it's going to be fine. And maybe that builds some resilience in not thinking about it too much.
It does. I mean, that's key. But I think the other point that you've just made is that reflecting on your conversations is a good thing, because otherwise we won't change. If we're just talking at people all the time and people are walking away and no one's re-engaging with us, then it's a sign that we're not probably not hitting the mark. So having the foresight to be able to reflect on it and go, okay, what didn't work there? What should I maybe have tried instead? But not beating yourself up about it.
Yeah, exactly. We're all at different levels, all at different points. Well, that's a really good piece of advice. Practice and reflection.
Yeah. And I think this environment has been great to be thinking about these things, because we're often chatting in these sorts of situations.
In podcast?
Well, Okay, see, there I go. Not my finest conversational point, no.
But yeah, in you're out at dinner and the lights are sort of
low.
similar. Yeah. This actually is maybe more of a focused environment to have a conversation, because there isn't that background noise, which is nice. So you can kind of focus on it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Plus, we're very familiar with each other. So
there is about. Do you know what? I'll just make one comment about background noise, because that's often a huge issue. It's often a killer of conversations, because you can't hear the person.
There's only so many ha's and what was that and huh?
Yep.
Yeah.
And the older I get, the more I find myself really, really straining for that. But I guess the comment is I've worked with quite a lot of people over the years who are autistic, and we talk so much about social spacing and not being too close and giving the other person space, but also just allowing people to know that they can step in, to lean in a bit further to hear what the other person's saying. So social distancing it's not a hard and fast rule. Like if you're in that noisy environment, it is okay to lean in an appropriate way to hear a little bit better.
I think that leaning is good as well, because it's not like you're stepping really close. It's sort of like my feet are here, but if you're saying something or we're even talking about something maybe that you don't want to shout out to the party, you can sort of lean in and then come back when you're talking. And so you're also not leaning in and just getting all that garlic bread breath in the face or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good another body tip. Body language advice of standing back at a appropriate distance. Yes. That's really good. Thanks for having this conversation with me, Mum, about adults conversation. It's definitely something that is applicable in every environment, workplace, social life, home life, relationships, sort of the bread and butter of humanity, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, that's good. So we've got a blog post out about this topic, so you'll be able to read up on some more tips and advice there. And yeah, if you want to read some more about conversation tips for our kids and children, we recently did a blog post about that and also a podcast episode, so you can catch up on that one if you missed it. Otherwise, thank you for listening and thank you for being here, Mum, and have a great week.